to Quinn Chapel AME Church's first podcast, Addressing the Elephant in the Room. I am Linda Riles-Massey, Director of Christian Education here at Quinn.
Our new podcast series is called Addressing the Elephant in the Room. For today, to begin, and in the future, we will be discussing those topics within the faith community that many congregants and members of churches are afraid to ask.
Our first segment will be to introduce our new pastor to the community. Yes, there is an elephant in the room. We have a white woman as the new pastor at a predominantly Black church here in Flint, Michigan. How things have changed.
Those of you who may not be familiar with the A.M.E. doctrine and discipline, our pastors are appointed annually. And if the bishop chooses to keep that pastor, it is a reappointment. We at Quinn are very excited to welcome our new pastor, Pastor Lynn Jackson, as our pastor for this church calendar year, 2021. Now, the AME Church is a history maker. As most of you know, and maybe you don't, the AME Church is the first church of color in the Americas. So we've been around for a long time. At Quinn Chapel, we continued in that legacy by being the first congregation of color in Flint and Genesee County. Again, that legacy continued when in 2016, the first female pastor was appointed to Quinn. Okay, get ready. In the year 2020, the first white female was appointed to Quinn. So today, we are going to give you a little background on our pastor. Pastor Lynn, welcome to Quinn Chapel and welcome to Flint.
Thank you, Sister Massey.
We began this interview with the question that many people in Quinn and in the community who have met you are asking. How did your Christian journey lead you as a white woman to the African Methodist Episcopal Church?
A good question. I know many are asking. It's been a wonderful journey. I was saved at a young age as a child in a Baptist church and swayed from church to church as I grew up. Went to Assembly of God, tried the non-denominational. There was a place in my walk where I thought, well, maybe I could pick the wrong denomination. I've grown quite a bit. But I went to a non-denominational church for many years and just kind of fell away from there. I was searching for a church where I could grow and feel fed. And I had married my husband, and at family gatherings, I would talk to his cousin and my sister-in-law, the Reverend Sharon Jackson. And they were always just so happy and filled with, when they talked about their church, they were excited about what was going on at their church. I said, I wish I could, find a church like that. And they said, well, why don't you come on and visit? I said, oh, come on. No, they said, go ahead, come on and visit. Our pastor and co-pastor would welcome you. The church would welcome you. I'm like, oh, are you sure? I don't know. They said, no, come on. Pastor Ingram and Reverend Jessica, they would welcome you. I said, okay, well, maybe I'll try. So I went and loved the church. I loved Reverend Gregory, as we called him lovingly, and Reverend Jessica, who are now Bishop and Supervisor Ingram. They were wonderful. The church was loving and kind and instructive, and I just loved everything about it. So I visited for about 3 years.
Now, if I could just jump right in just for the community. Our pastor mentioned the elder and the bishop. For those of you who don't know, the AME Church is structured on the Episcopalian model. So when we talk bishop, that is like a CEO of an organization, and the elder is like his assistant. So in the AME church, we reference elders and bishops a lot. Now, I know you talked about Bishop Ingram, but the foundation of your ministry was it built at the Oak Grove AME Church in Detroit?
Yes.
A very famous one in Detroit, I might add, with a lot of celebrities in that church. So speak to the community about that experience.
Yes. Well, the church that they invited me to was Oak Grove AME Church in Detroit. And again, it was just such a wonderful church. I couldn't help but go. So I was there for services. I was there for everything. And it was, I think, about 3 years. And I didn't feel that I could join, though. I thought, okay, they welcomed me, and, that's good, but I didn't think that I could join in my heart.
And why was that? Why was that?
It was just that reluctancy.
That we often get when we are debating whether or not to join a church.
Right, and I just didn't know, to be quite honest, being a Caucasian female, a white woman, if I could really join and be a part
and
of.
Be accepted.
And be accepted and be a part of the church.
It is interesting that you say that, because most of us who have worked in corporate America, and I would speak for myself personally, oftentimes we are the only Black face in the room, particularly if you're a senior like I am, and you experienced those times before many more Blacks were hired in. So now you have firsthand experience of what it's like to be the only one in a sea of other faces.
Yes.
And that experience, how did it shape your moving forward, though? Because I'm sure you had that angst and you had to talk it through.
I did. And it actually took one time I was sitting there, I think it was a church meeting, and I would sit to the side, and I refer to her as Reverend Jessica, said to me, "When are you finally going to join this church?" And I just had this moment like, I really can
Okay.
be accepted. She said it, I can really be accepted. And it was like something just changed. And I immediately joined.
That single moment is what we should be doing as Christians when we have visitors coming into our house of worship, to make that person feel welcome and accepted.
Yes.
So it does work.
It
now
works.
Look at you now. You've gone from that membership to Quinn is your third church, I believe, at which you have pastored.
Yes.
Now, getting to the Reverend part,
Mm-hmm.
what positions or missions or ministries were you involved in at Oak Grove?
Well, I was struggling to find my place, but at the time I had small children. And so I thought, well, at least I could help out in the children's ministry and, the Wednesday night Sunday school or Bible study that they had for the children. So
It always begins with the babies.
Begins with the
doesn't
children,
it?
yeah. So I started there, and one thing led to another, and I was pushed out of my comfort zone many times.
And how was your husband feeling about all of this?
He was, at that time, he's okay with what I was doing, and supportive. He's always been very supportive.
You have an extensive professional background, and I want to share that with the community. Our Pastor Lynn is a licensed counselor. She comes with corporate work experience, as well as an MBA.
Now, talk to us about how your education and professional experience has influenced your ministry.
Oh, absolutely. I didn't realize at the time, but now looking back over the years, I see how God has positioned me throughout the years and has guided me through this. So I started out, grew up in a white world.
Of course.
Right. Through high school. Started my first real job at the Postal Service. Met my husband, fell in love, of course, and had an awakening. saw a whole new perspective.
Interesting that you say perspective, because in this environment, we talk a little bit about white privilege. So did that white privilege bubble up when you say, I saw a new perspective?
It did. It did, and I had no idea. Again, I grew up in a white world, and I didn't realize even the subtle ways of discrimination and those kind of things, I'll be honest. And when I was with my husband, and remember this was 30 plus
years ago. We were talking about late 70s, early 80s.
Yes. And so you didn't see the interracial marriages as much back then. Of course they existed. But when we were together, it was like, really?
From both sides, white and black, right?
Yes, absolutely. And so it was an eye-opening experience, and I lived through that. And then, so God has always just placed me in these situations. So then at work, I wanted to promote to a new position. I saw the mechanics standing over there drinking coffee and waiting for machines to break down, and I'm sitting here on the machine constantly working. I said, I want that job. So I said, I want that job, and I worked to get that job. However, came up against a wall and found out, well, there had been no other woman to have that position in maintenance as a mechanic. I'm like, well, why not me? So I worked very hard, and I moved up from a mechanic to electronic technician, went into supervision, went into management, and I was afforded an opportunity. I was chosen for a maintenance leadership development program. And there I was able to become a certified plant maintenance manager, and I also was able to get my master's degree in business administration.
That is a wonderful, wonderful path. One thing that many of us have learned is when you end up in a management role, it's always nice to have worked in those jobs of the people who will be reporting to you.
Yes.
And I think that kind of works with the ministry too, because you began working with the children. You saw how things worked within the AME church. And beginning, you were invited in love. And I think we need to understand also, and by the way, to our listening community, I am the director of Christian education, so if I'm throwing in these little pieces about the AME church, it's all about the learning. The AME church was founded by people of African descent, but not necessarily for a people of color. I know that I'll probably get some pushback on that, but we have to look at the history of the AME church that was basically born out of the free African society. The members were actually meeting in a white Methodist church. And if I'm wrong on that, I promise you I will correct it in a future podcast. But I'm listening to your story, and to me, it leads into, yes, I am a white woman in a black congregation, but I understand I can never say that I'm who you are, but I have a greater understanding because of that journey.
Yes.
One thing about education and professional work experience, when you are either a person of color or white person, I think it broadens your perspective. How you receive it is up to the individual. Do you agree with that?
I do. I do agree with you.
Because marrying your husband and the management role that you had at your job, did you have a primarily staff of color?
Mixed.
Did you get any pushback when your staff found out that you were married to a man of color? During the 80s, now people, it was the 80s, I remember.
Yes, I got pushed back for everything.
Because you were a woman.
I was a woman in a man's world, so whatever, was always pushed back. So I learned to, work through those type of things.
Now, on August 22nd of this year, at our Michigan conference, Pastor Lynn was appointed to Quinn. Having been pastor at an Adrian church in Adrian, Michigan, I believe, Bethel, A.M.E. in
Bethel.
Adrian. That was referred to as the Methodist Church, not the A.M.E. church,
Yes.
but the Methodist Church. What was your first reaction when the bishop announced your appointment that you were coming to Quinn, a church being pastored by your sister-in-law?
Well, it was a shock, so much so.
It was a shock to us too. So.
It was a shock. I had no idea that I was going to be moved. Thought some of my counterparts were going to be moved, and we were having conversations along those lines. Never thought that I was going to be moved. And got off the phone with one of them, and then my phone rang, and when I looked down and saw Bishop White, I literally dropped the phone. I was so shocked because I knew what that meant. And when he said hello and told me that he wanted to move me to Quinn, I said, Bishop, you don't understand. That's my sister-in-law's church. Like, clearly I'm thinking in my mind, I didn't say that, but there must be a mistake. That's my sister-in-law's church. But he said, no, I understand that. And I said, okay.
Well, I must share with you, to our listeners, our conference was being held via Zoom because, of course, we had the pandemic. And I was watching and listening, and I, too, thought it was a mistake. And I immediately text our pastor, Sharon Nees, I'm like, did he just make a mistake? And she responded, no. And at that time, I was flooded with so many emotions, and I immediately got on the phone, and I was saying, our pastor is being moved. And to our community, we had that reaction because when Pastor Sharon Nees came in, she began to do what needed to be done in Quinn Chapel. We all love her very, very much and hated to see her go because she had begun so much work. Now, because pastors in A.M.E. Church are typically moved annually, we have come to expect that we might get a new pastor. Doesn't make it any easier, but we have come to expect. With your coming in as a white woman, there are members who have some issues with that. And you have to understand that we are an older church and many of our members are coming from a totally different time. Speak to those members and give them a sense, if you can, of comfort that you will lead us according to God's plan.
Yes. Well, again, this was not something that I sought out. This was a divine appointment. God has placed me here, and I believe that it is for a purpose and for a calling as a church family. And so we are here not by accident together. It is by design of the Lord. And so I just ask for the people to please trust God. Trust in God and know that He does have a plan for us. And watch and see. And, you know, we have to go back to what you said earlier, Sister Massey, that the A.M.E. church was founded, Richard Allen founded the church because he believed that church is for all of God's people, that all of God's people should and have the right to worship the Lord. And so I think we go back to that. And again, if you look around in what's happening in the world today, I think God is speaking clearly to us that we need to come together as one body, one people. We are God's people together. And so I just say to the congregation and to those that wonder, trust in the Lord. Lean not into our own understanding, but trust in the Lord.
Which takes me to this comment. I hope you don't mind, since I'm not a pastor, but I'm welcoming anyone within in the community, I should say, who would like to worship with Quinn and get to know our Pastor Lynn better, to join us in our Sunday morning virtual services. The whole notion is that it's not about who's in the pulpit, but the messages that are being delivered from the pulpit, if I can be so bold as to state that. You mentioned it is God's plan, and I know in the earlier meetings that we've had, and unfortunately we've had thousands and we've had hundreds. Should speak to the media team because of Zoom. You have a new theme for Quinn called to Kingdom Excellence. Speak to our community about that.
Yes, God placed that in my heart, because if we are called to kingdom excellence, if we will align ourselves to God's plan and do things that are decent and in order the way God would have us to do, all of the other pieces will fall together. All of the other pieces will come together, and we will move forward in what Christ has called us to do, in his plan and his purpose.
So with that in mind, to our community and our congregation, what is your vision to move Quinn forward and to get new members into Quinn? In spite of the fact that you're a white pastor in a black church in Flint, Michigan.
Sure. Well, my plan and vision is to first to build on the foundation that's already here. Quinn is a wonderful church. It's a wonderful church family. And I have the honor of following in the footsteps of a dynamic, wonderful pastor in Reverend Lynn Jackson. And so I plan to just build on a solid foundation and then again move through the guidance of Christ and just take us to the next level. God is taking us to another level. And so again, if we listen to the Lord and follow his lead, there's nothing that we cannot do. As a church family, as a community, there's a great work to be done. And I know that God is positioning us to serve.
You have heard it here first, addressing the elephant in the room in Quinn Chapel A.M.E. Church's first podcast. We have introduced our new pastor, Pastor Lynn Jackson, and for all of you who were whispering, we have come front and center.
Thank you for listening to the very first podcast, The Elephant in the Room. We hope that you will subscribe and pass it on to your friends. We invite you to join us in our morning virtual services on Sunday. Just contact the church office at 238-5636 with login information. If you are interested in hearing more about our pastor, she is available as a one-on-one phone call or one-on-one Zoom. Don't miss out on asking her questions. She is open to it. Again, thank you so much for sharing in our very first podcast. And we look forward to your subscribing and listening in on future segments.